Okay, hey guys. First of all, it's been 6 weeks since I filmed my last video. I got better and now I'm sick again, so now my voice is gonna still sound weird because I live on a college campus around a bunch of people carrying germs. So that is also why the scenery looks different, because I'm filming from my dorm room. I need there to not be a lot of that in this video. Anyways, I'm filming in my dorm room today, so it's really hard for good lighting, for good scenery in here, because it's either like my spotlight, which I have on right now, which is my desk lamp, believe it or not, or fluorescence overhead, which, trust me, y'all don't want to see that. So this is what we have, this is what we're dealing with, and if you're gonna stick with me through this video, I appreciate you so much, and please come back. Anyways, I am someone who, especially recently, I've been reading a lot of fantasy. And I've always enjoyed reading fantasy since I got back into reading 5 years ago. I would like to say that I've read quite a lot. Now, I am no expert, obviously. I'm not very well versed in adult fantasy specifically. But I did want to touch on the fantasy series that I've read, especially since starting YouTube. And I think there's 1 or 2 fantasy standalones on here that I'm also going to touch on. But I wanted to do a fun little like smash or pass type idea with fantasy series. And since I've read so many, I'm going to tell you which ones are worth reading and which ones aren't. Let's just get started. First of all, Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas. This is everywhere, and it's everywhere for a reason. 100% smash. This is a 8-book series, and at the time of me filming this video, I am 6 books in and like 30 minutes into the audiobook of Tower of Dawn, which is book 7. So I would say I have a pretty good basis on the series. It's about Celaena. Celaena is a nationally famous assassin in her world. She is a very strong female lead character. Surrounding characters and supporting characters that you pick up throughout the series, every single one of them I care so much about. Either I hate them or I love them, and they're all very well developed. The series, as you continue, especially looks in a lot of different characters' point of views, and I would highly recommend reading it. But it's a more in-depth fantasy series, so if you're starting reading fantasy, you could start there. I know adults in my life who have started there like long before it was popular, like 10 years ago, and they started reading by reading that series. If you're like an adult in your mid-20s, maybe you could start there if you have a background in reading. But if you're a teenager, or if you're like a young adult who's like just starting reading, I'd recommend reading a few series before you get to Throne of Glass. The second series that I just started is Lightlark by Alex Aster. I've only read the first book in this series so far, so I'm gonna hold off on saying smash or pass just yet. But what I will tell you is the world building is a little meh. It kind of feels like something that you've read before. Lightlark follows Isla, I think, and she is this thing called a wildling, and a wildling is one of the 6 different realms in the Lightlark world. And they all have different powers, and Lightlark itself is an island that they all used to live on, but like the island was destroyed, and so every 100 years they get to meet together. The leaders of all these different groups get to meet together and try to see if they can break the curses and get Lightlark, the island, to come back. Like I said, I'm not gonna tell you smash or pass just yet. But Lightlark itself wasn't my favorite book, but I am going to continue the series. Next is The Empyrean, which is Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm so far by Rebecca Yarros. I have read all 3 of those books, and it is one of my favorite fantasy series. 100% smash. Basically, you just get to follow Violet, who is the stereotypical, you know, weak, frail little girl who gets thrown into some crazy scenario. Like, she is sent to a dragon military school, and her mom is just like, you're gonna go ride dragons, and she could literally die before she gets to the other side of the bridge where she enters dragon school. So it's a very high stakes fantasy. The dragons talk, which is the coolest thing ever. It is so fun to see the banter between the characters, and they're dragons, and there is such a huge found family aspect of Fourth Wing. The first book is the best so far for sure, but I have a feeling that as the series continues to flesh out in the next 2 books, it's just going to continue to get better and better. The next series that I want to talk about is one that is not talked about as much. That is The World of the Narrows by Adrienne Young. And first of all, smash. I really like this series. It is a young adult fantasy series that follows this girl named Fable. And she is the daughter of the most important trader on the sea. And he dumps her on this janky little island when she is 14 or 13. And she has to learn how to survive by herself. So the book picks up like 3 or 4 years later when after she's been surviving on this janky little trashy island. You get to see her journey on how she gets onto this new trader's ship. They end up going on several different adventures. Now, what I will say about this series is the first book especially confused me a lot. It is only a duology, so keep that in mind. But the first book confused me a lot in the world building and just the language of them being sailors. I'd say this one like sits right in between beginner and intermediate because there's almost no magical elements of the fantasy. It was a sailor world that got me, which is obviously not that fantastical. Especially if you know that kind of stuff, definitely pick up this series. This is a very beginner friendly one. The next series technically has a prequel series that I'm not going to talk about in this video, and that is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. But the series that I'm going to talk about is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. 100% smash. Again, one of my favorite fantasy series of all times. It is again young adult, and it is a trilogy. And you get to follow Evangeline Fox, who has pink hair, which isn't that so freaking cool. She is an orphan who lives in the south of the kingdom, and something really horrible is going on with her boyfriend and her stepsister, if you get the gist of what I'm saying. And she feels so heartbroken, and she doesn't know why her boyfriend has left her for her stepsister. She believes he's under a curse. So she takes this up with a fate, which is like a demigod of their world. And this fate is called the Prince of Hearts. And the #1 rule in this world of Once Upon a Broken Heart is never make a deal with a fate, because they're tricksters, they're mischievous, but she makes a deal with a fate. And you have to watch her go through the consequences of that. And the romance in this series is one of my favorites of all time. It is Enemies to Lovers, which is incredible, and I love it so much. And it's just so magical and like fairy tale-esque. I would say the world building is super easy, so if you're a beginner in fantasy and are looking for a super fun series to start, this is the one for you. Now, the next series is another duology, but I've only read the first book, so I'm not going to tell you smash or pass yet. But that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I liked this book. It's very much a heist situation between this group of criminals who are going on this quest to steal this particular thing. I couldn't even really explain it to you. I didn't understand it very well. It is very much an intermediate fantasy, even though it is a YA fantasy. But the world building is super intricate. The heist is confusing. The found family is good. I will say it's worth reading if you're an intermediate fantasy reader. Now, I haven't read Crooked Kingdom yet, which is the second book of the duology. It's on my physical TBR. I just am not very motivated to read it because I was so confused by the first book. The next series, this is another beginner-friendly one, especially if you like the Hunger Games, and that is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This book was released only a couple years ago, and the amount of hype that it's gotten is insane. So far, the series has Powerless, and then Powerful, which is a novella from a different character's point of view, and Reckless, which is the second book in the series. Now, you're following Payton, and Payton lives in this world of elites and ordinaries. I think that's what they're called. I don't know, roll with me here. So the elites have these special powers. Payton is an ordinary, so she has no power. And the thing about ordinaries is they're sentenced to death because the elites believe that the ordinaries are going to infect them with their powerless disease. See what I did there? And Payton has been living, for like 17 years now under the radar, but she gets wrapped up in some shady business with the prince of the kingdom, who is obviously an elite. And there are some trials involved. There is enemies to lovers involved. It's just a super fun world. It is very cliche, so don't go in expecting anything unique, but it's a good series. Especially if you're a beginner, I would highly recommend reading it. But yeah, I loved it. The next series is The Renegades by Marissa Meyer. This is more of a dystopian series than a fantasy series, but I still included it because I feel like there's a very gray line in between those two genres. It's about superheroes, and I'd say pass. I only read the first book of this series, and it just, I don't know, I didn't like it that much. The book's pacing is very, very slow, and I feel like not a lot happened, but it's about superheroes. So, especially if you're a guy watching this video and you want to read fantasy, I'd recommend reading The Renegades. Unless you're like a Marvel super fan, I don't think you're gonna love The Renegades that much. It's also very much a toss-up between what side is good and what side is evil. You kind of get the villain's perspective in this book from society's standpoint, which is really interesting, but again, I'd say pass. I also want to talk about One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a duology, and it is a gothic adult fantasy, and I'd say pass. But that's my own personal opinion. But that's also weird, because I rated One Dark Window 4.5 stars. However, I got 75% through Two Twisted Crowns, and I got so icked out that I had to put it down. Which is funny, also, because most people like Two Twisted Crowns better than One Dark Window. It's a gothic fantasy, which obviously means it's going to be a pretty dark fantasy. And that's just not for me, I don't think. It got a little bit demonic and a little bit devilish, and that is not something that I love all that much. So I just put the series down, especially if that kind of stuff bothers you. I'd recommend not reading it. Oh my word. This is probably the worst one on this list. And this is an unpopular opinion from me. But if you have similar reading taste to me, you're probably gonna think the same thing. And that is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. It is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. And I would 100% say pass. Do not read this series. I can't remember if it's a duology, a trilogy, whatever. I read the first book and rated it 2 stars, so obviously I did not continue the series. It's a gang rivalry in China in the 1920s, which sounded very interesting to me when I picked it up. It's not. The two main characters are so annoying. They're bickering the entire story. Like, it's not even like attractive rivals to lovers. It's just, I don't know. They're just bickering the whole story. Didn't like it. I didn't understand any of the politics of the world. It was just super confusing, and the story just dragged on, and then something really big would happen, and then it would just drag on. Like, the pacing was horrible. So if you can help it, don't read that series. Obviously use your own judgment. I'm just giving you my opinion. Now, if you haven't heard of this series, I don't know what you're doing, man, but it is ACOTAR, or A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I would say smash, but this series is way overhyped, in my opinion. Court of Thorns and Roses is in the world of humans and fae, and if you're not very familiar with the world of fantasy, they are like magical creatures, like think elves and goblins and like fantastical creatures kind of thing, not human. And you follow Feyre, who is the main girl of the book. And she is captured and taken from the human world into the Fae world. And the Fae politics, to me, were the most interesting part of the story. A lot of stuff is going on in between these different courts, like I said. The first book is A Court of Thorns and Roses. The second book is A Court of Mist and Fury. It takes place in a world of like where there's a spring court and a night court. You get the idea. I really liked the series, but I didn't like every single moment of the series. If you're under 18, please don't read this series because it is a very spicy series, unfortunately. And I knew that going in, but I didn't like really know that going in. So I think that's part of the reason that I didn't love the series as much as everyone else, because I'm someone who does not appreciate spice, which is why I did not read the last book in that series, which is A Court of Silver Flames, because that book I've been told that book is just straight all spice. So, however, if you are over the age of 18, I would recommend reading it, but don't go in with these astronomical expectations. A lot of people say it's a beginner fantasy series, and there are a lot of people who started reading from that series. I would say it's somewhere, again, on the line between beginner and intermediate. Oh my goodness, this duology is so cute, and I still think about it, even though it wasn't, neither book was a 5-star. But that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is YA fantasy, and it's precious, but it's very slow paced. I think it's considered high stakes fantasy, but the story is told in a very low stakes manner, and the characters themselves don't have the highest stakes in what is actually going on in the world. It's about Iris and Rowan? Why can't I remember his name? Oh my gosh. But it's about Iris and him, and they have typewriters that are magical. And she starts writing letters, and she thinks that she's sending them to her brother, who has gone off to fight in the War of the Gods, which is the high stakes part that I was talking about. And she thinks that she's sending these letters to her brother because she's just folding them up, putting them under her armoire, and they're disappearing. She's not. She's writing them to, we're gonna call him Roman because I forgot. But she's writing them to Roman, and Roman knows that she's writing them. Like, she doesn't know he's writing her back. So it's this super cute little like letter exchange, and it's so precious. And I love the first book especially. Like I said, there is a war between the gods. They do end up, they're journalists, that's why they have typewriters. And they end up like going off to the war to cover the war, which is really cool. The second book I did not like as much, but I still liked both of them. And they also give very much a historical fiction vibe. It feels a lot like you're kind of sitting on the sidelines of World War II. But obviously, like I said, way lower stakes. So if I haven't said it already, definitely smash. There's a reason that I've been refraining from saying that a series is the best fantasy series of all time throughout this video, because I've been saving that title for this duology. That is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson and Vow of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This is the best fantasy series that I've ever read. And I will stand by that. Even over Fourth Wing, I love this series. So Kazi is being sent off by her government, and she works for the government, and she is being sent off to capture Jace, who is a traitor to their government. And it's incredible. I can't tell you very much about the series because I don't remember a lot that wouldn't spoil it. The world building is intense in this series, so I would definitely say it's pretty deep into the intermediate side of fantasy. Again, even though it is young adult, it is an incredible series. And honestly, I'm kind of glad that I can't remember enough to tell you a beginner synopsis of this series, because I want you to go in blind, because that's basically what I did. And you will fall in love with these characters, and if you don't, you can personally blame me. Please, if you take anything from this video, I smashed that series. I love it. Please go read it. Belladonna by Adeline Grace is a book that kind of took off in 2023, and a series has since been finished. However, I only read Belladonna. It's about a girl who basically everyone around her, whoever she lives with at the time, dies. So she believes that she's under some kind of curse from like the devil himself. And essentially you end up coming across the devil himself in this book. And it was okay, but the pacing was horrible. It was a really slow book. I would say pass, personally. I'd never continue the series. Now, the series had good vibes, so like, have I considered picking it back up? Yes. And even though it is still a gothic fantasy, it's a lot less dark than something like One Dark Window, because mainly, I mean, it is YA, so there's lines that you can't cross. It was okay, but I'd say pass. Don't waste your time. We have another pass. The Queen's Assassin by Melissa de la Cruz. I am not even gonna waste time talking about this book because it was stupid. And I never continued the series, and it has a low Goodreads rating, and it's YA fantasy, and just don't waste your time. Pass. Now, this one's interesting. So, my favorite author between the ages of like 16 and 17 was Kiera Cass, and she's the author of the Selection series, which again, I'm not talking about in this video because I read it before I started YouTube. The Selection series is where she got her fame, but after she wrote that series, she wrote the series called Betrothed. It's two kingdoms. You got a princess and a prince. I can't remember if the princess falls in love with like a peasant or what, but it's warring kingdoms, and the second book was definitely better than the first book. However, unless you're like 14, I'd say pass. I think it was good for me at the time, but I don't think, like, if you're around my age watching this video, don't go read it. However, 1,000 Heartbeats by Kiera Cass is a standalone. Now, I believe it's over 500 pages, if I'm remembering correctly. But this one is a fairy tale-esque fantasy, and again, it's a princess and a prince and like warring kingdoms. You have enemies to lovers, and it's a really sweet story. It's one of the first books that I read and posted about on this channel, which is crazy, but I really liked that book, and especially if you want a good fantasy standalone. However, the pacing is really slow. Like, looking back on it, I remember that the pacing was really slow reading that book. So if that's gonna bother you, maybe don't read it. But it's beginner friendly. It's a standalone, so you don't get roped into a series. And I would actually say smash. I really liked that book specifically. Now, the last series that I want to talk about, again, it's more of a dystopian series than a fantasy series, and that is Shatter Me by Tahereh Mafi. I'm not going to say smash or pass on this series because I've not read the novellas, and I read this series a long time ago. Some of the books I did not even rate, and I did not like as much as other books. If you don't know, Shatter Me, including the novellas, I think it's like a 12-book series at this point. I only read the 6 like full novels, and I liked them. The third one is the best, and the fourth and fifth one are like close seconds. I'd say the fifth one is probably the second best, but the first two are not that great. So it's a young adult dystopian series, and you're following this girl named Juliet, and she is being kept in an insane asylum. And it's insane because people believe that she is insane, but she is taken out of this insane asylum to work for the government by this guy named Aaron Warner. And she hates this guy, like, with all of her being. You can go from there. Read at your own discretion based on what I've told you. Like I said, I have mixed opinions on the series. I think the romance of the series is phenomenal. I think a couple of the characters are phenomenal, but I think a lot of the politics of the world and different things are not the best. But it's beginner friendly, so if you don't mind getting into a series with that many books, you could maybe start there. Anyways, I hope that was helpful to hear my opinions on fantasy books. If it wasn't, I'm so sorry, and I don't know why you're still here. I'm just kidding. You're still here. I love you. Let me know what you think about this dorm setting, because if this scene like really bothers you, please tell me. I can do my best to fix that. But if you want more regular uploads, this is what we have. And right now there are not going to be a ton of vlogs because life update. I'm a freshman in college, so I have 6 classes this semester for 18 credit hours. I'm also a part-time barista. I also have a life, obviously. However, I also love to read, and I love to post these videos, and I don't have any friends who read. So if you enjoy my content, interact with it, like it, share it, subscribe. I promise I'm trying to be as regular as possible, and I'm really trying to get into a routine that will help me stay consistent on YouTube because I do love it so much. I love filming, I love reading. This is just the perfect outlet for me. Anyways, enough about me. Comment down below which one of these series is your favorite. And yeah, that's all I have for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. Love you. Bye.